Good afternoon, ladies. We have got the last presentation for CC4, which is production cost and revenue. So this is essentially PowerPoint 10 for the narrated PowerPoints, and we're going to be looking at technological change. Okay, so it's 4.1.4.8. And some of the things that you're going to need to understand is, and this is obviously in the context of production cost and revenue, is are the following rather. So the first thing is that you need to understand the difference between invention and innovation, and we'll take a look at that in a minute. And also the fact that technological change is going to affect all sorts of things, including production, productivity, and the efficiency of firms and their costs of production. So fundamentally, all that we looked at in terms of average costs, marginal cost, etc., are going to be fundamentally affected by technological change. And clearly, another thing that we need to understand is that technological change can lead to development of new products, which is obviously a good thing, and that can lead to the development of new markets, but it also might destroy existing markets. And obviously this creative destruction that goes on is something that you need to appreciate and understand and to be able to explain. Another thing is that obviously that technological change can clearly affect the structure of different markets too, and that's something that we're going to move on to look at in the next booklet, in the CC5 booklet, where we start to look at the structure of markets. And also you need to understand this process of creative destruction and how that's linked to technological change. Now, this is a relatively short presentation, or should be, hopefully, but there are quite a few things that I'd like you to take a look at and to research. And there are some really nice links into some examples of technological change, and also some quite nice examples and questions that you might want to pose yourself to find out a little bit more about technological change and how that might affect an economy. Okay, so without further ado, let's get started. Oops, I'm going the wrong way. So in this instance, then let's just go back one. Hold on. So the first things first, then, and this is, we're looking at page 62 in your booklet. So right towards the end of the booklet. So we've got pages 62, 63, 64 that were the areas that we're going to cover, and also on page 65 in your booklet, there's a self-study exercise where you can check out your understanding of some key terms as far as CC4 is concerned, but we'll talk a little bit more about that later. Okay, so effectively, what we're looking at is change and progress, and specifically technological change and progress. Well, on page 62, you've got quite a nice summary of some of the issues that might demonstrate technological change and progress, and it's really a combination of a number of things. One is invention, two could be innovation, three is both the diffusion and the spread of technology within an economy. And when we think about the disciplines that this involves, it's really a combination of science, engineering, and knowledge of markets and exactly what people want and how industries need to change in order to survive, but also to provide exactly what is required by customers in the future. And if we think about some of the principles that have changed, and some of the ways in which we've changed, or the economy has changed in our lifetime, just the thought of e-commerce and electronic commerce and the use of the internet and being able to buy products and services from the web, and the speed at which you can get these products provided to you is a real eye-opener. And clearly, as you're a little bit younger than I am, you've sort of been always exposed to this, but seeing how that change has fundamentally transformed the way in which we buy goods and services, and how it's affected the high street, as an example, just insane the amount of change that is going on. And that speed of change is only going to get quicker as technology gets faster and faster and more efficient. So let's just take a look at a couple of examples then, of just two companies, and there are a load more examples, but two companies that have really, truly disrupted two major industry sectors. One is Tesla, and that's in the electric car field, but Elon Musk and his various businesses aren't just transforming and challenging the electric car or the car industry with electric cars, but also looking at Amazon and the way in which they have pretty much transformed the whole of retail and seem to be going through virtually any number of markets and looking at transforming that by using technology to really drive home a competitive advantage on their behalf. So let's take a look at this in a little bit more detail then. So there are some links, as I mentioned, and this just gives you an idea of just how efficient some of these businesses are these days. Tesla, as an example, brilliant application of robotics to the production of cars and electric cars in particular. And there's a link on this PowerPoint that you can take a look at, and also on page 62 in your booklets. There's quite a long link that you might have to type in, but what I will do is provide you with the overall links, or this presentation actually is on the Teams class materials area, so that's something that you can go and take a look at via this link. Okay, so the Tesla robotics link takes you to about a 5-6 minute video which shows you the way in which robotics have been implemented and how Tesla are controlling the whole of the production process for their high-end cars to make sure that the quality is really high and the efficient process is just a real joy to see, as you will be able to take a look at. The other link is to Amazon, and this is about the artificial intelligence flywheel. Now, the AI flywheel is something that is used a significant amount whenever Amazon is talked about or the reasons behind its success are described. And basically what they've done is used computer power and computer technology and the ability to use computers and the data that they provide to constantly refine what people know what people want, okay, by looking at their past purchases, by making suggestions to them how they might want to buy in the future. They're using humongous amounts of data and data processing power in order to demonstrate or to look at what they think people will want to buy next, or what they might suggest that they might want to buy. Okay, so again, without going into huge amounts of detail, and this is a fantastically interesting field, and there is just an enormous amount of information out there. And if you want to find out and it really interests you, that's something that I would suggest that you take a look at. I think when we look at the really important organizations that are out there at the moment, and the very successful and most profitable organizations, are pretty much all of those that have really got their heads around how they can apply technology and computer processing and computer algorithms to be able to really understand what customers want and then keep refining what the company does in order to make sure they still provide that extra level of service over and above what anybody else can do. And it really is a game changer. And, there are, again, a couple of links that I'll show you later, which just demonstrate the importance of the really big organizations that have addressed this are those that are being fantastically successful, and they're growing very, very quickly from pretty much, well, not just a low base, absolute zero, into some of the world's biggest and most successful businesses. So I suggest what I'd like you to do is take a look and research these two companies. It doesn't have to be just these two. You can look at a whole raft of others, but in terms of technological change and invention and innovation, they are two very good examples. And again, if you needed to evidence an approach, if you had a question on this sort of thing, to be able to demonstrate that you understand a little bit about either Amazon or Tesla and the way they've applied technology and technological change, then you couldn't go too far wrong. The other thing that's not entirely surprising is that Jeff Bezos, who runs, or until fairly recently ran Amazon, I think he's just literally stood down, and Elon Musk are two of the richest men in the world. Essentially, if you take a look, if you sort of cut back from all the other information that's out there about these two organizations, the one thing that's at their heart is their fantastic application of computer and technological change in order to really provide the best service they can for their customers. Again, if you want to find out some more, Basonomics is a book that's been written all about Amazon and their success, and the reasons behind it. And the Elon Musk autobiography, also very, very interesting. And you can get those on Audible. But also, if you're interested in finding out a bit more about what it is that seems to really make these organisations stand out, they're fascinating reads. Okay, let's take a look at the next thing then. So, innovation or invention, or invention or innovation. Now, lots of people think that they're one of the same things, but to be honest, they're quite different. An invention is where literally somebody like Dyson has invented a completely new process to demonstrate an understanding of a new process, but also it's not been seen before. So if we take the example of the dual cyclone uh, Hoover that Dyson came up with, nobody had really seen technology like that, and that was a patented invention that Dyson came up with. So in some instances where you're talking about making something entirely new, there aren't actually that many organisations that are invention based. Okay, there are a few, but basically that's where things that didn't actually exist before, and what they've done is basically almost broken the mold and come up with something completely new. Now, so that's an invention. And it tends to be, if you invent something, what you tend to do is you will patent that invention, and you will attempt to protect that intellectual property, if you like, in order to try and make some money out of it. Because invention, generally speaking, involves quite a lot of research and development, very expensive process. And in some cases, if you don't then go through the process of patenting your new idea, then the problem could be that people might try and copy it, and you might not necessarily get the rewards that you deserve as a result. So that's invention. Now, if we take innovation, it's very much in the same stable as invention, but in this instance, innovation is basically improving on something that already exists. Okay, and that clearly can be where we're actually taking something that already exists, but actually making it significantly better. So innovating, improving something, changing something. And again, if we take a look on page 63, there's a really nice example there of some definitions on invention and innovation, but specifically talks about innovation and as far as Apple is concerned. So Apple didn't invent too many things. There are things that they've actually been really successful on. They haven't invented, but what they've done is taken a look at how something has been delivered in the past, and then fundamentally innovated, changed, improved things. And the example that is cited, and it is a brilliant example, and it's something that if you're interested in Apple or in any sort of innovative approach and you want to find out some more about it, go and take a look at this as the example. And it talks about the iPod and how that is a brilliant example of innovation. Um, some of you, and I think we've talked about this once or twice before, some of you will be aware that prior to the iPod, Sony were a very, very powerful producer of portable music devices. So that included, thank you, that included a number of different things. One, it included the Walkman brand that, again, some of you will be familiar with, but also they were one of the biggest music producers in the world. And as a result of that, they were in a very strong position to move the portable music market into any direction they wanted to. And this little upstart Apple came along and basically pretty much changed everything. Okay, they basically looked at the way in which this whole market was being served, and they really did change the game. They basically weren't doing anything different in one sense, in that they were providing portable music, but the way in which they chose to do it and the innovative approach that they adopted, both in the way they branded, but also the beautiful simplicity in their design, was just a real true game changer. And fundamentally, as it's described in the on page 63 in the booklet, they didn't really do anything. Well, didn't do anything different. They didn't invent anything. They did lots of things differently, but they didn't invent a portable music player as such. They took the technology that existed and repurposed it, if you like, and looked at the ways in which they could move into this whole new area. And if you think about the way they also then changed music broadcasting and effectively changed the whole way in which the music industry worked, so that you moved into iTunes and the tunes being downloaded, etc. Incredible change, incredible creative destruction, if you like, where they came into a market and said, we're going to do things differently. And fundamentally, every other business was pretty much left in their wake. So this innovative approach was absolutely incredible, and a very powerful and successful process that they adopted. Now, there is an argument to say that since Steve Jobs' sad demise, he died about 6 or 7 years ago, Apple haven't really been as innovative as they were when he was at the helm. They were constantly innovating, constantly looking at how they could do things better. And I'm not saying they're not doing that now, but in terms of innovating and changing markets and really applying this principle of creative destruction, they pretty much stopped doing that. What they're very good at now is, and have been over the last few years, is being an extremely profitable organization. But in terms of their innovation, my argument would be that they're probably not as innovative as they were whilst Jobs was at the helm. However, that is something that, again, you can go and find out a significant amount more about if it's something that interests you. And certainly this combination of how technology is changing markets and how fundamentally important it is for any business in the future to be able to address this principle of how can they make their business more successful, more streamlined through technology, through the use of computer data, through the use of information that they hold about their customers and where they're going to find them and how they need to change their product to suit, is fundamentally going to be how businesses are going to be more successful in the future. So if it's something that you're interested in and finding out more about, that's something that would serve you very well, particularly if you're thinking about going into some form of business in the future. So something to bear in mind. Okay, so have a look at the course companion notes on how Apple's innovative DNA have affected how successful they've been, and also go and take a look and find some more information about it if that's something that you really enjoy finding out about and understanding better. So let's take a look then at the next thing then. So the effect on technological change, and this is something that to bear in mind when we come to look at the bottom of page 63 in your course companion booklets, thinking about how economic change is affecting a whole range of things. Okay, technological changes are making huge differences to economic performance, and if we relate that back to what we've talked about in previous presentations, then looking at methods of production, looking at productivity, looking at efficiency, and also the cost of production are fundamentally going to be affected by the technological change that is going on in the world, if you like, but certainly in lots of different markets. Okay, and if you think about some of the changes that have happened and are changing and are happening all the time, we've got automation, we've got computerization, we've got improvements in process control, and the speed at which things can be produced and delivered is making a huge amount of difference to the productivity that could be achieved, and effectively that's going to then affect, if we talk about productivity, that's to do with the amount of output we can achieve per unit of input. And if we achieve more productivity, both in terms of producing more out of the resources that we have available to us, then clearly that's then going to reduce our unit cost of production. That allows us to produce more from our scarce resources, so we're allocating resources more efficiently, we're being more productively efficient, and on the basis of that, if we can then use that as an advantage over and above other firms that are doing the same thing, then clearly we can get some sort of cost advantage as a result, which then gives us an advantage over our competitors. And clearly, if we've got a cost advantage or we've got a competitive advantage, that gives us an opportunity to really gain market share, become very successful, and hopefully become a market leader, and then maybe be able to influence the price on in markets and become a price maker as opposed to a price taker. So there's huge benefits for an individual firm to do that, but also there's huge benefits for a government to encourage those things to happen too, because clearly if we've got more efficient firms and better firms, and we're being more productive in the UK, that on an international stage is going to mean that we're going to gain more sales from overseas, and we're going to do more trade and be more successful. And that clearly, if businesses become more successful, governments gain more tax revenue from corporation tax, and also if businesses are more successful, they're going to want to employ more people, and that then means that we're all benefiting by having higher levels of disposable income, hopefully, and that then means, if in turn, that effectively, moving into macroeconomics now, as you can probably understand, that then means that effectively we can aggregate demand will go up. That will then lead to higher levels of jobs. That means that we're going to get more improvements in gross domestic product, and also that governments will have more tax revenue to be able to improve not just productivity and infrastructure for industry, but also society in terms of the way that it looks after us all in the different ways in which the government chooses to. Okay, so so the other thing to bear in mind is that clearly this technological change is also going to have a fundamental effect on the change of structures in markets. Okay, if you think about and there's a couple of links in this PowerPoint which shows you just how quickly different businesses or businesses that have become very successful very quickly, who have taken over from the old guard, and the speed at which that's happened over the last 10 to 15 years is just incredible. Okay, and there are two clips that I'd like you to take a look at, and one, it's a graphic sort of a changing graphic which shows you the speed at which different businesses have grown over the last few years, and it's a fascinating watch, to be honest, and it's something that we'll talk about in a bit more detail when we have our next online catch up. But the links are here. One looks at the brand value increase of different organisations, and the other looks at the market capitalisation increase. Now, market capitalisation is basically share price times by the number of shares that are being issued by particular companies. They are two things that demonstrate how successful different businesses are being. And when you take a look at the speed at which some of these businesses have come from almost nowhere, and in what you would consider to be fairly difficult economic conditions around about 2008, 2009 financial crash, and right the way through to 2020, 2021, you'd think that businesses would have been struggling somewhat in those time frames. But actually, some of those that have used technological change to really drive the success of their business have been massively successful in that time. Okay, so these links again are worth having a watch. Again, you should be able to access them either via your the links are actually included on page 64 in your booklet, and also there's some quite nice examples of Apple and creative destruction in the Power 4th edition on page 117, which just describes a little bit more about how Apple in particular have used this creative destruction model to their advantage, and we'll look at that in a little bit more detail in a minute. Okay, so taking a look at what creative destruction is then, it's a term that's used quite a lot in economics, and it's a bit of a weird one to try and define, but fundamentally that's what creative destruction is. Okay, it's capitalism evolving and renewing itself over time through new technologies and innovations, replacing old technologies and innovations. Okay, so one of the fundamental principles of capitalism is the free market, allocating resources, and also, if we think about the true principles of capitalism, it's those people who have got the resources and can actually combine the resources in a decent way, actually gaining benefit from that and making profits from it, for want of a better term. Now, that's a very simplistic view, but that's one of the fundamental principles. Now, when we talk about creative destruction, what we're saying is that capitalism and the very nature of the free market means that markets change, and markets change to suit the requirements of consumers. Now, one could argue that in this case, creative destruction is about capitalism. The whole principle of the free market has to renew itself, has to think about how, well, it doesn't have to think about, but has to try to actually satisfy the changing requirements and needs of its consumers. I mean, in this case, creative destruction is about how new technologies and innovations can help to improve that process, get us more efficient, become more productively efficient, reduce our costs, but also provide better and more relevant products and services to our consumers. But in this instance, what happens as well is that creative destruction process actually can leave a trail of destruction in its wake, for want of a better term. So if we think about the way in which the high street has been fundamentally affected by all that's happened in terms of e-commerce. Amazon obviously are one of the main proponents of that, but there are a whole range of other very, very big organizations that have sprung out of internet sales. And if you think about Boohoo and ASOS and Lord knows however many organizations that are now very, very successful as online retailers, that has fundamentally meant that effectively the high street has been creatively destroyed almost, or certainly they're having to look to ways of changing the way that the high street experience is, because at the moment there is very little reason for any of us truly to use the high street in the way that we used to, and that's been down to this massive change, the change in which consumers are consuming goods and buying goods, and the speed at which and the logistic brilliance of organizations that have gone online, that really the big retailers that have been very, very successful, the high street retailers who have been very successful over a long period of time, really haven't adapted to. And there are lots of examples, and unfortunately, it's a part of the process. But it's fundamentally the way in which all organisations need to address the way in which markets are changing. Because if they're choosing not to, they're choosing to ignore this principle, and the internet's just going to go away, it's not going to be successful. Well, unfortunately, I think they're somewhat deluded, and there are lots of examples of businesses that are going to the wall on a fairly regular basis because they simply are not able to. They haven't changed their business models to suit the new way in which we as consumers are consuming goods, and also the way in which organisations are improving their logistic approach and actually cutting their costs, and are able to effectively really creatively destroy the old guard, if you like, in terms of the way that things used to be. So that's a short, relatively short process that I've just gone through, guys, but there's quite a lot of information that I'd like you to, and it's something that if you're interested in it, there is lots and lots of information out there which actually describes in a little bit more detail how that whole process works. But fundamentally, remember that if we've got technological change, if we've got innovation, invention, and a whole range of other things going on, what that should do in terms of our production capabilities, the way in which we might actually generate revenue and actually control costs, that is fundamentally going to be affected by technological change. And if businesses truly embrace technological change, they can make game-changing decisions which actually can really, number one, ensure their survival into the future, and number two, make them very, very successful in terms of improving the way in which they satisfy customer requirements, but also how they might be able to influence markets and become market leaders in the future. So lots to think about there, but that effectively concludes the CC4 booklet. There is, as I mentioned to you, on page 65, and some of you may have tried to fill this in already, but there is a list of formula based on CC4 Course Companion 4 that actually we've covered, and just test yourself, see if you can remember the formulas, and also just try and explain what each one is all about, just so that you've got that again as a fallback position when you come to revise this content. Okay, so thanks for listening once more, and I'll get this onto Teams and explain when I'd like you to take a look at it. Okay, thanks.